Hi there. Good afternoon. And welcome. Glad to see everybody here. Welcome to Building for a Specific User. My name is Diógenes Brito. Most folks call me Dio. I'm a senior product designer on the Slack platform team, and I'm excited to welcome three product leads that will tell us a little bit more about building for user personas other than developers, because we know we've got a lot of developers here, and it can be hard to figure out how to best tailor our Slack apps for users unlike ourselves. So let's welcome them up here. Big round of applause, and I'll have them introduce themselves in a minute. But we got Nancy, Sam, and Caitlin. Please. Hi, please sit down. Welcome. Hi there. Well, one by one now, please. Tell us who you are, a little bit about yourself. Oh, kind of short on that part, but and then what your product and your Slack app does.
All right. I'm Nancy Riley. I'm here from Hubspot, and I'm the general manager of our App Hub. So I own the product team that does all of our APIs and integrations, including our Slack app that we've rolled out today. Very exciting. So our Slack app addresses a few different personas. So it will notify you if you've been assigned something in HubSpot, so kind of for that salesperson who needs to know they've got a new lead. We've got a few slash commands in there, and of course, app actions. So for any persona, sales, marketing, service who wants to track down something that is in their Slack conversation, they can pop that over into HubSpot as a task.
Sam Boonin, I'm a Capricorn. I work at ZenDesk, which hopefully you guys have heard of. It's a customer support platform. I run product strategy there, which is an interesting role, but also includes running the dev teams who build our integrations with third parties. And along with everybody else here, we launched a new app today on the Slack marketplace that incorporates app actions.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Johnson. I'm the platform product management lead at Asana. Our platform team similarly does APIs and integrations with other tools like Slack. Our integration, sorry. Our integration makes use of notifications similar to the HubSpot one, and app actions, of course, to save work that happens in Slack back to Asana. And we were also very excited to make use of the interactive message buttons to help people respond very quickly to Asana information that comes into Slack.
Cool. Well, let's jump right in. I think the first thing I'd like to know from each of you is, how did you decide exactly what functionality to bring into Slack?
So I can start. So HubSpot is very into Slack, and I'm not just saying that because we're here at their conference. But our whole team, wall-to-wall, uses the Slack app. So it was pretty straightforward when we said, okay, we're going to build this integration. All of our team who also uses HubSpot, obviously, in their day-to-day, our sales and marketing teams were like, okay, great, here's what you need to do. Here's all the functionality that I want. So we could use those as a bit of a proxy. But we did have to be careful because we are larger than our average HubSpot customer, right? So even as Dio mentioned at the beginning, developers designing for developers, we didn't want to be HubSpot designing for HubSpot specific use cases and ignoring things that might be different at other companies. So we did have to broaden out from there, but we had a pretty good list to start with on what people were going to be interested in from the sales and marketing use case.
We sort of went the opposite direction in some ways, where it was more like, what features aren't we going to bring in to Slack? Because it's just, we could do everything that happens inside of ZenDesk could theoretically happen inside of Slack and vice versa. We've had a ZenDesk Slack app for a couple years that was built actually by a Slack team internally like 4 or 5 years ago. So to a certain extent, we were just, based on the massive amounts of customer feedback that we've gotten, we were just updating that app. But we did take a step back and say, well, what are the sort of the bare minimum things that we want to make sure you can do between the two different apps? But again, the bigger challenge for us was, not what do we put in Slack or what Slack stuff do we put in ZenDesk, but how do we have what do we not do those things? I could talk more about that if you want, although it'll get really boring fast.
Yeah, so for us, we take a look, typically when we design products, at a couple of different roles. So I can get into that now if you want. I don't know if you...
Sure. The next thing I was going to ask is how you think of how you've defined the roles you're designing for.
Yeah, so I'll pre-answer that question and also answer this one. So we typically, first we break our users into team leads and contributors. So Asana is a software that really helps people track their work, get clarity on who's doing what by when, very loved by those team lead types who are getting everyone to do the actual work, or the contributors. But we've also figured out in our user research that we have sort of 3 different types of team leads in terms of their involvement in the process. So a visioner, we call, might be an executive who gets in and lives in PowerPoint and does some great presentation that gets everyone jazzed about their work. We have a planner who's a product manager type in Silicon Valley parlance, someone who tends to get the project set up and figure out what needs to be built, and then the shippers, who are the ones who are really working with the contributors, often slacking them, asking for status updates. So it was that communication loop between the shippers and the contributors that we really focused on for this integration. And we specifically interviewed a lot of those people to understand what it was, the pain that they were facing, what they needed. And so there were 3 things that we understood that were going on between these 2 people, that even though the users that we interviewed were already using Slack and Asana, that they were seeing as points of friction. The first, which was the most surprising to us, was actually that contributors really wanted more notifications. They really wanted to have more direct information when there was work that they needed to be doing. It's this anxiety around, oh no, am I missing something? Does my project manager really want me to be working on this thing and not working on it? So we focused on these really personal notifications that you could be interrupted for. Slack is a great medium for telling people when something's important and giving you a ping. The second one was app actions, so really getting a system of record when you are working on something so that everybody knows you're working on it and providing that clarity back in Asana. So we were super excited about that feature. And then the third one was having a contributor be able to react really quickly to something that a project manager is pinging them about. So being able to say, I'm on it, or actually, Nancy is going to take a look at this because I'm not the right person to do it, and be able to provide that clarity so that they're not either not getting credit for the work that they did agree to do, or being asked to do something that they couldn't do.
Let me double down on that for a second. How did you discover these roles initially? How does user research kind of play a part in your product process?
Yeah, so we took a look at the way a lot of different teams work. We don't necessarily work just with one vertical or one type of team, which is part of the challenge of segmenting these types of users. But we did look at 2 different axes. So in terms of dividing the 3 types of team leads from contributors, we look at communication in general. So team leads are communicating outwards a lot more, and contributors tend to receive and react to the communication. The other axis on which we segmented the team leads is that time of involvement in a project. You have the visioners in the beginning who get involved very early on, the planners who sort of set things up and fill in the middle, and then the shippers who get things over the line.
And Sam, how did you discover roles in a similar way when you were designing, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, the parallels between probably all 3 of us in terms of how we think about things. I think from our perspective, we're blessed or cursed with like massive amounts of feedback on anything we do from product, right? And it's really easy for us to oversample on the feedback that we're getting, which often come from our passionate customers or our power users or dissatisfied users. So when we think about doing user research or something like that, what we try to do, and we're doing better as we get sort of more mature as a company, is doing simple surveys, simple user interviews, and making sure that the feedback that we're getting represents our customer base and not just the people that are complaining at us or are passionate about the next feature or something like that. And in terms of when we built this Slack app, what we found was that we naturally went in our head to solving some of the complicated edge cases that we cared about. As an example here is that ZenDesk is basically a conversation tool with some workflow wrapped around it. Slack is basically a conversation tool with some workflow about it. So we were wrapping our heads around, wait a minute, what part of the conversation should be represented here versus Slack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what we realized when we did some basic user research is that most of the problems that our customers wanted solved were really basic, right? I want to make sure that I can, if I have to reach out to if I'm in ZenDesk and I'm a support person, I want to reach out to somebody on my team to help solve a customer problem that they're going to, I can do that in Slack, and they're going to see it in Slack, and I can notify them. And if they want to, update the status of a customer issue, that they can do it in Slack and return it and stuff. So I think for us, it was, user research and personas are really great, but reminding ourselves to get back to solving the basic use cases is pretty important.
And Nancy, did your team during the design process also discover these segments in a similar way?
Yeah, and I think to Sam's point of not over-indexing on the vocal folks, we also look at the data, right? So we look at the usage data for the different folks who are using the tools, and I think it doesn't give you a completely different answer. Similar to what Caitlin was saying, it ends up to be for HubSpot manager type, so people who are looking at reporting and people who are assigning things out, and then individual contributors who are doing the work, and that falls into, for us, roughly the sales, marketing, and service buckets across those. So using those data points, we could then identify those personas and then go talk to people to kind of fill out that picture of who they are, what they're doing, what they're trying to achieve. And then I think as we thought about how that relates to Slack, we see the folks in those kinds of roles that are also using Slack alongside of HubSpot are kind of using or are interested in kind of two different things. They're in Slack all day long. I think April mentioned this morning it's open 10 hours a day. You're actively using it a couple hours a day for most people. That's a lot. So letting them know when something urgent has come up, they've been assigned something, they're behind on a task, a deal is kind of falling into a stagnant state, they need to deal with it, or collaboration. So for the manager types, is there some sort of report they want to see on a periodic basis? So thinking about future use cases that we could expand on our integration, how do we serve that persona, which those kind of urgent notifications is more for the individual contributor? What else could we think about doing for that manager level?
Yeah, that's something we've noticed ourselves looking at the wide breadth of apps that are available on the directory and get traction. Some of the better ones really take advantage of the specific context in Slack where you're probably in the middle of a conversation doing something, and they, instead of rebuilding all of their functionality, they kind of fit right into the conversation at key moments. So a lot of people here maybe don't have apps with a really large amount of users quite yet. So how do y'all think about maybe new audiences, new features where it's a little earlier in the design process and you're not exactly sure how they'll be used in Slack? How do you think about more experimental features in your app?
Well, I mean, again, not pandering to our hosts here, but you guys have made it pretty easy to create bots and apps and extensions to Slack. And I certainly, from our own internal usage of Slack, some of the experimental stuff is what's really stuck, right? So I think that user research is great and strategy is great. I've got it in my job title. I'm a big fan of strategy, but sometimes just experimentation and just trying shit out is the best thing you can do, especially if you're trying to drive adoption of Slack in your company, or you're trying to figure out or you're a software developer and you're trying to figure out whether you can drive adoption of your software by building a Slack app. Sometimes we all have a tendency to overthink things. Sometimes it's just build it and see what happens, and learn from actual customer usage can be a way to go as well. As well as some of the tools and tricks of user research and being really smart and deliberate about what you're doing. The bar is so low on building apps now and building functionality that it used to never be possible to do that, but now you can.
Yeah, I think we would do the same. I mean, we do have a good population inside the company, so we might eat our own dog food and experiment on our own folks first. But if you can have whether it's a beta-tolerant population or something where people can opt into that and really try it out and give you the feedback, so you can either iterate, or if you're going to do experiments like that, you do have to be willing to kill things, because otherwise you're going to have all these stuff floating out there that you then have to maintain that like a very small number of people are using. Nobody enjoys that. But yeah, to your point, the barrier to entry is low. So throw it out there and see what people like, and get that surprising feedback. I think some of what we've talked about is it's the surprising stuff that you learn, whether it's in user research or in beta and experimentation, that can drive you to the greatest innovation going forward.
Yeah, for us, also sizable dog food population internally. But one of the things that I think we learned very early on when we were just dog fooding with our team, which is maybe 5 people. So I think that's probably a much more achievable number of folks to try out your application. Is just trying too many things at once did confuse even 5 people. So really just trying a few things at a time and seeing what lands and seeing what feels good. And then being able to pair that up with a story for how someone outside your team might respond to something. So I'm a project manager at a marketing agency, and it makes me feel anxious when I have to nag people or something like that, because we're developers and just, we don't feel so bad bugging people because it's, hey, it just needs to get done. It's just logical, right? But understanding sort of the emotional connection for how this is going to grow beyond your team as well.
Cool. Well, speaking of surprising findings and user testing, do any of y'all want to share some of the more surprising things you've learned when doing this kind of user testing?
I think Sam has a story.
Yes.
One of my first jobs at ZenDesk, I've been there for a while, was doing our trial onboarding experience and making sure that we spend a lot of our marketing dollars getting people to come to our website and click on the trial button, and that powers a lot of our business. And that sort of like a lot of companies, that trial to paid conversion is kind of a big deal, right? And as we've gotten bigger and maybe resting on our laurels a little bit, we tend to forget that the basic sort of web try buy flow is with the sort of the fuel that drives our entire business. So we've got high thousands of accounts that are using the Slack ZenDesk integration, and we're going to build these edge cases around, comment thread syncing between things and roles and permissions. And if you're members of groups in ZenDesk, you'll automatically get populated into a Slack channel. This is what we're focusing our development on, and what we realize is that our OAuth flow is just horribly broken, right? So we forgot about the basics of like if a company cannot actually click on a button and OAuth between Slack and ZenDesk, they're never going to get to any of the features that we think are important. And shame on us, we should have realized that. And it took research. It took getting a list of 10 customers and giving them the beta app and having them go through the process and watching that painful experience of product managers and software developers are on a Zoom with customers that are setting up your app and they're failing at installation is a humbling experience. But something I think that that's a value of, like a surprising finding. Like, we're idiots, right? That was very surprising to us because we're pretty smart, and, So yes, the TLDR is that we're dumb. That was surprising.
Well, I think a lot of times the surprises do come once you get out into the wild. Like in user testing, you think you're covering all the scenarios, but things that you've made as like just base assumptions turn out to actually be wrong when you get it out into the field. So our Slack app is pretty new, but we also recently launched an integration with Shopify. And one of the base assumptions that we made was that the system of record for all of the orders is Shopify. Like, we're bringing that data over into HubSpot. You're going to be able to then use it for marketing and sales and service and all these things. But like, that seems pretty core. And we even mentioned it on the kind of customer interviews that we were doing. Like, yeah, we're assuming this, and kind of moved on. And then we launched it, and people are like, well, why can't I edit the order once it's in HubSpot? Like, duh, why can't you? I'm like, but it's the system of record. Like, what do you mean, why can't I edit it? And it turns out what they want to do is add like custom properties, add more information onto what's already there. They don't want to change the things, but they need to be able to add additional information that they then use for other sorts of reporting or segmentation or whatever they're trying to do. And I think we just glossed over that in the user testing and in the interviews, because it was just an assumption, I think, in our own heads. And it's easy kind of as developers and even as product people to say, okay, system of record means once it comes over, it shall not be changed. Whereas to them, system of record means the part that came over shall not be changed, but there's this other stuff I want to do. And I think we just went right past that until it's out there. And now we're getting this feedback that says, oh, wait a minute. We need to question that and decide whether we can iterate and add some more functionality.
Yeah, our most surprising finding came during our user research, actually. When we found out that a lot of these individual contributors, we had a bit of an assumption beforehand that they didn't want to be bothered so much. They mostly wanted to do their work and then submit it and go home and be happy about that. But that there was a real hunger from them for knowing when they were mentioned, when something was assigned to them, or when something that was assigned to them was changing an important field, like a due date or something like that. And so really just asking for those personal notifications was something that surprised us. We came into building this new version of our Slack integration really excited about taking advantage of some of these newer platform features, but the notifications ability has been around for quite a while, and I think it was something we were really sad that we missed out on for a couple of years, because we didn't have to wait for actions for that one.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a theme here about returning back to basics and just trying your app for as a user might, and actually trying it on real users. Let's see. Well, I think for the folks in the audience with smaller operations and less staff going, do you have some tips on incorporating user research as part of your process if you have a few less resources available?
I feel like we all have less resources. We were chatting beforehand. It's like I think everyone's short of designers and researchers, and so even in a big company or a larger company, you're still operating on a bit of a shoestring. But I mean, I think putting yourself in the user's shoes is the most critical thing, and if it's at all possible, to observe your target person doing their job, as that's where you can get some of those surprises. Like, what tabs do they have open? What are they flipping back and forth between? You know, if you can get that, if you're thinking about an integration, right, you want to see them using both things, but like, what are they struggling with? It's not always what they tell you. There may be things that they just kind of accept or have gotten so used to, they have workarounds for, that they would never think to ask about it or think to add that as a requirement, but that you can observe by watching them do things. And it can be hard if you're on a tight budget. I think most customers are excited to get attention, especially from the product team, right? So that they wanna tell you what they wanna do. If you have to do it by like video conference and can't do it in person, that's fine, but the more direct observation you can do, the better off you are.
I mean, again, one of those panels where everybody agrees, right?
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I mean, empathy is this sort of superpower that product people and product design people spend a lot of time crafting over our careers, right? To sort of get back to what we all learned in, I have kids, what they'll learn at some point, to sort of put yourself in other people's shoes and really understand, design and build for your users and for the way that your users act and think and emote and things along those lines. And you don't need a lot of PMs, you don't need a big design budget, you don't need to do a big research project to get there. A lot of it is what Nancy was saying, is just to sort of build something, show it to somebody. Hey, I built this thing for you. Do you think you would use it? Can I sit down with you over lunch and try it with you? Or, even to do that in Slack, right? You can DM somebody in Slack and say, hey, I just built this bot. What do you think about it? Is this going to work for you? Or something along those lines. And again, just mentally turning your empathy bit on or something like that, and doing that is probably that doesn't require a huge budget.
To Sam's point, building on the empathy bit, really just trying to attach an emotion to what people are feeling and identify that pain point, and that's something that you can get in casual interviews with other people. We're all building tools that people are using to try and get their work done, and people like to complain about work. You can find out pretty easily what's bugging people about their job.
You should make customer support software if you want to hear people complain about their work.
Oh boy,
because they have the hardest jobs in the company.
Yeah, that sounds like it. The second thing I'd say is you'd be surprised how few people you need to talk to start getting patterns. I think it was on our third participant in our UX research that almost said literally the same sentence as the first two, that we were like, oh, yeah, okay. So you might not necessarily need a big team interviewing 40 people to do something. Really just getting those casual conversations, and we do our interviews over video chat. They're fairly low budget. Just bring a couple people in and you can get a decent sample sometimes.
Cool. Well, let's see. I think I'd like to give people a chance to ask one or two questions. We'll see. I know we only have a few minutes left, but does anyone have something they'd like to ask our lovely panelists here?
Hi. I have two questions. You can answer in one. But maybe the first one is, what was the motivation initially actually to build a Slack app, beside the fact that it's a commodity, and I think power users like to have the Slack app because, we all the benefits, but is that driving new users? Is that driving new users to Hubspot, Asana, and ZenDesk? And on the other end, then what are those KPIs? How do you actually think that the app is working the way you expect it, or is actually being used the way you want it, and that kind of stuff?
That's a great question, because I'm sure I'm in the business of having to justify product investments, right? And from our perspective, the initial motivation is that sort of the Venn diagram of like ZenDesk customers and Slack customers has a surprising overlap, even surprising to us. We know that because we had an app in the past, and then there are some tricks you can do to figure that out, to do that. So our motivation primarily was we want to satisfy our existing customers and give them a better product experience, because we know that support teams live in support all day in ZenDesk, but support's a team sport, and that the playing field of that team sport that tends to happen in Slack. So our motivation was better product experience, better integration will lead to happier customers, which will lead to lower churn, faster expansion. The more people in a company are using that are interacting in support, the more likelihood they'll spin up another ZenDesk instance for another use case, et cetera, et cetera. So for us, and it took us a while to talk through that, because it wasn't integrate with this company and get new leads, or integrate with this company and enter a new market. It was very much satisfy our base. In terms of the KPIs, that's still a work in progress, because different integrations, we do have different KPIs. So we'll look at some of the obvious stuff about adoption of this, percentage of the base that we think is already using Slack, how many of them are actually using the Slack app is probably the thing that we'll track mostly. But those are hard questions, for us to answer, and not only for us to answer, but for us to get, we're now 2,200 employees, so to get enough people around the company to agree, right, is hard.
And just to throw this in there, KPI means key performance indicator. I know there's a time where I didn't know this sort of jargon.
Yeah, for us, we also had a previous, much more pared down version of the integration that already was one of our top integrations. And so it was fairly easy to say, oh, we have a decent overlap in user base, but also understanding why. We think about messaging and work management, which is our sweet spot, is being very hand in hand in terms of a lot of collaboration happening in work management software and a lot of communication happening in messaging tools. So we've wanted to connect those two for a while. We've actually released a couple of other integrations with messaging, like email, specifically clients as well, to try and ease this gap. And so really just helping whole teams get on board, even if it's only your project manager who's like really living in Asana 8 hours a day, but still like helping you provide that clarity and helping your project manager really do their job and add value to the organization is, we see messaging tools as a key part of that.
Hey guys, just curious, in that interview process, how do you empathize with the user or the employee, and how do you infer what they would do versus what they say they would do, or what they want? And I find that to be an ongoing challenge, and do you have any recommendations on that? Thank you.
I think a lot of times is to keep digging into the why. So, and it can feel awkward when you're in the interview, like, I want this, well, why? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, really trying to get to their KPIs, to their, what is success gonna look like for them, and try to move them away from dictating the solution to you. And it can be hard, and I think different interviewees either respond well to that or don't, to really try to guide them more towards, okay, yes, you want a button that does blah, 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 but what is it that you're trying to achieve? What is the end goal? What's the outcome that you want to have? Even getting back to that emotion, like, what do you want? How are you going to feel when this goes correctly? What's that going to look like? What could go wrong? And try to bring them, kind of guide them away from just giving you the solution. There's plenty of books and articles and stuff on kind of actual tactics and scripts to use for that, and it can help to actually study up on that, because it can feel a little unnatural. I know a lot of my product teams that I've been on, we've done like training with outside folks to get people used to doing those kind of interviews, because it can feel difficult.
Prototyping, right? I mean, if you have a prototype, even if it's in InVision, or if even it's clicking through, don't say anything. We've done this in the past using like usertesting.com, where record videos or something like that. But like the best way to get empathy is to actually see something through your customer's eyes, right? And get them to, and there are many tricks to figure out, like, don't ask them what they're gonna do, but actually see what they're gonna do, and see the mistake, and see all the assumptions that you made about what they're gonna click in what order, and be wrong, is another way, adding to what Nancy said, and that's been, relatively low cost and successful for us.
Yeah, just again echoing what Nancy said, really just digging into why, like when someone's asking for notifications, rather than just spamming them with every possible notification that we can give them, really being like, well, why do you need to know these things? What do you want to know? Like, why do you care? Who's going to get mad at you if it doesn't happen? Just ask several W questions until you get somewhere that really helps you with things making more sense.
Cool. Well, we are out of time here, so I want to thank Nancy, Sam, and Caitlin for coming up here and telling us a little bit about the design of their Slack apps and user research. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. And a round of applause for our panelists here.